Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to tell you a bit about the weakest point in chess. And that's considered, especially in the beginning part of the game, to be the f7 square for black and f2 for white. That's one of the reasons why we recommend to castle as soon as possible in the early stages of the game. Let me show you a famous trick that actually I managed to pull off a number of times in my childhood. After e4, g6, d4, bishop g7, this is the modern defense. White develops with knight to f3. Black plays d6, opening the diagonal of the second bishop as well, and bishop c4. And quite surprisingly in this position, black can kind of lose or reach a very, very bad position very quickly in various ways that kind of look natural developing moves. The correct move in this position for black is to play knight f6 and castle as soon as possible. However, let's stop for a moment and see what would happen if black would develop the bishop to g4. That would be a mistake because it would put the bishop on an unprotected square, and white immediately would have the opportunity to win a pawn by sacrificing the bishop for a pawn on f7, and after king captures back, give a discovered attack a check, and at the same time attack the black bishop. So that means that after the black king moves out of the check, queen takes bishop, and white came out ahead. Let's go back. In this position, there is another very natural looking move, and that is to develop the knight to d7. That would be an even worse move than the bishop move that we just saw, bishop g4. And this is quite surprising, that such an early stage of the game, black can lose. In fact, I recall at one point the British Grandmaster David Norwood made this mistake and had some difficult moments to overcome when he noticed how bad of a mistake this was. He was praying, making sure his opponent doesn't find the correct move, the refutation of the move. And indeed, in that game, white made a different move than the correct one and gave black the opportunity to fix the problem. However, if white finds the correct combination here, white will win significant material or even checkmate. And this is exactly the theme of this lesson, the weakness of the f7 square. And as you'll see in several examples in this lesson, there are circumstances where an early bishop sacrifice on that square or an early attack on that square results a quick win. So always when your opponent is attacking that square, watch out for it. Or if you have an opportunity, check it out if in your exact situation, if it works or not. If king takes, knight g5. As a matter of fact, it was best not to capture the bishop, but simply move out of the check, because now black only has bad choices. Moving the king to f6 would result in checkmate immediately after queen goes to f3. Moving the king to f8 would allow a fork with knight to e6. And neither is king e8 any better than king f8, because again, after knight e6, even though it's not a fork, but the poor black queen is trapped right on its initial square. A very instructive example. Let's move on to the next game. This is also from a real game between two Soviet masters. White played e4, e5, knight c3, the Vienna, knight c6, and bishop c4. Well, all this is so far so good, normal opening moves. And here Black made a serious mistake, breaking an opening principle to move the same piece a second time. Moving also a knight to the edge of the board is not a good idea in general. However, the question is, how can White take advantage of this? If White would need to retreat the bishop simply, then Black would be okay. However, White at such an early stage of the game is already able to take advantage of this situation that Black is moving the same piece around instead of developing different pieces, and the f7 square again is weak. Amazing, already on the fourth move, White has a winning attack. King captures, and the queen moves to h5 check. Now, if Black blocks the check with the pawn, White would capture the center pawn on e5, immediately creating a double attack on Black's rook and knight, and would gain the sacrificed material back and more. Let's go back. After a check on h5, Black can try to hang on to the pawn. But now, White would chase the king further. King d6, still trying to hang on to the pawn, because remember, if the king would move to e7, after queen takes e5, Black will lose the knight also, at least on a5. Now, as we learned in some of the previous lessons, if your opponent's king is stuck in the middle, and in fact is wandering around in the middle of the board, it's rather important not to waste time, but open files and diagonals for your bishop and rooks as quickly as possible, oftentimes even if it means sacrificing further material, like here. The correct move is the most forceful and ambitious move, advancing the d-pawn to d4. Now this opens the diagonal of the dark-squared bishop, and once that bishop gets out, White will be ready to get the queenside rook into the game as well. If in this position, Black would capture the pawn on d4, White would gain time and immediately bring the bishop into the game. And now if king c6, checkmate would arrive right away. Or if the king moves back to e7, White would continue chasing the king and continue chasing the king, and now it's quite clear that Black's position is hopeless. The black pieces are hanging, and the black king is still in a miserable position. Going back to the position after playing d4, Black has some other options, not that they are any better. If Black would try to protect the pawn on e5 and try to offer an exchange of queens, which would certainly benefit Black, for one, because Black at the moment is ahead in material, and for two, because if the queens would be off the board, the fact that the black king is wandering around wouldn't be as important anymore as it is when the queens are still on the board. Here, White has a way to win the black queen by trading pawns, and then, among other choices, playing bishop f4, pinning the queen. If Black would protect the pawn with the queen on e8 and then try to move out of the check, not recapturing, Then white would continue by playing e6 and creating a discovered attack, and again black would lose material, while their king would still be in a hopeless position in the middle of the board. In the actual game, black here played knight to c6, getting the knight back to the game. The problem is the king is still stuck. White continued by pawn takes, and now black has serious trouble. In the game, the king went to c5, which is obviously asking for trouble. However, black didn't do it from his free choice, but because moving to e7 would allow a very unpleasant check with bishop g5, or recapturing the pawn on e5 would invite bishop to f4, pinning the knight, and then queen f6 again would not work, because after trade, white would castle, give a check, and then black would lose the queen on the following move. Let's go back and see the rest of the game. Black played king c5, and then again, typically following the principle, if your opponent's king is stuck in the middle, keep chasing it until you'll checkmate it. And came bishop e3, forcing the king to move to b4, and the chase continues. The king has only one move, and the discovered check. The chase continues again. Now the king is getting stuck. If the king would move out of the check, immediate checkmate would arrive. So black played d5, and white has the time to simply capture the pawn, attack the black knight, and also create discovered check threats. Black moved the knight away, and now, of course, a discovered check would not be a good idea because the white queen is under attack, but white can do better, namely, keep chasing the king. King has only one square, and the chase continues, and the checkmate arrived. After this quick example, let's see another one that has also been played in a real game. In fact, it was a correspondence game in the middle of the 20th century. It's also a good example to demonstrate that even when your opponent makes mistakes, you should not underestimate your opponent. In this position, in the Petrov defense, black's best move is to play d6 and chase the white knight back before capturing the white pawn on e4. And those games typically lead to a balanced or close to equal game. On the other hand, it would be a serious mistake to capture the white pawn immediately, because after queen e2, and if the black knight moves away, white would have a discovery. So that's kind of out of question. So as I mentioned, the correct move is to play d6 and then capture the pawn. However, in this game, black made a mistake. Played knight c6, developing. Developing, of course, as we know, is very, very important in the opening part of the game. However, shouldn't be at the cost of losing material. So here it was a priority to win the pawn back instead of developing. Also, by developing, black is offering an exchange of the knights, and when we are behind material, that's not a good thing to do. And this is kind of interesting that so far white made all good moves, white already won a pawn, white is clearly better, and yet with a couple of careless moves, all of a sudden it's black who wins the game. In this position, white still made a natural move. The pawn on e4 is under attack, and typically in such situations, we either move the attack piece away from the attack or try to protect it. Well, how could white protect the pawn? White could do that by either developing the knight to c3, or white could, for example, move the pawn up to d3. Either of those would be fine choices. Instead, white chose to advance the pawn to e5 in hopes that by attacking the knight, black will have to waste more time. And this move in itself is not a major mistake yet. Black moved the knight to e4. In this position, white, of course, is still better, being a pawn up. But in this position, white, by choosing the most natural move of all, loses the game. Well, what is the most natural move of all? Well, to me it certainly looks to advance the d-pawn and attacking the knight on e4. If now black moves the knight, white can continue developing and then castling and be a pawn up and be just fine. How can this natural move be such a devastating mistake? Well, there are strange things in chess sometimes. Well, can you figure out what is the winning move for black here? Well, hope you took your time. You can obviously take a lot longer time than the time I pause my lesson for you to give a chance to try to figure out a solution on your own. I suggest if you didn't find it within a couple of seconds that I post, take a longer time and try to figure out, because I have the experience that my students and myself even, you remember things much better if you took the effort, the time, in trying to find it on your own, instead of just listening to the solution immediately. So in this case, the correct move is moving the bishop to c5. Amazingly, black can ignore the threat to the knight, because if now pawn takes knight, then black has bishop takes f2. As I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, the weakest square in the beginning part of the game for both black and white are the f2 and f7 squares. Now, if king takes bishop, white would lose the queen, or after king e2, white would still lose the queen after bishop to g4. Let's go back for a moment and see if white can do any better after bishop c5. Well, bishop c5, first of all, puts a second attacker on that crucial key f2 square. If the f-pawn would move forward, black would have the opportunity to still move the knight to f2 and create a fork over the white queen and rook. But what happens, for example, after a logical defensive move such as bishop e3? Well, then black has to make forceful moves to achieve something. And namely, in this case, that is here, to trade bishops and then use again still the weak point in white's camp on f2. Play queen h4 check. Of course, if the king moves, black immediately checkmates by playing queen to f2. So g3 is a clearly better move, but nevertheless, black comes out ahead after knight takes g3, winning at least a pawn for now, attacking the white rook. If pawn takes knight, black can simply capture the rook with material gain, and moving the rook away to g1 would just not solve the problems, because the black knight could move back to e4 And then white could only avoid the checkmate on the following move by blocking the check with the rook, and that of course would result, again, major material loss. Let's go back again to the position after bishop to c5 and see what would happen if white would play d4. After d4 in this position, in addition to capturing the pawn immediately, black can do even better. Again, typical example. When you see a good move, look for a better one. After d4, black is best off sacrificing the knight on f2. And then after king takes knight, bishop takes pawn check. If the king moves back to e1, then bishop f2, as we saw in the main variation. After king e2, bishop comes to g4. And if the king would try to go up, that would not end in any good either, because the king would be chased until it gets to a position where white would lose the queen in any way. For example, after king g3, just bishop takes pawn and then capturing the queen. Or again, if the king would move back to e2, black could play either bishop g4 or, in fact, even better in this case, queen e4, followed by a real quick checkmate. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. In this position, black has two very far advanced passed pawns. Typically, the rule of thumb is that if one side has two connected passed pawns reaching the 6th rank, that is 2 squares from the promotion square, and it's only the rook that's trying to hold them off, they cannot. So here, in this case, therefore, white has to go on a counterattack. And white can win this game amazingly because of the unfortunate positioning of the black king. So try to sit back, relax, and think. Figure out, how can white win this game? In fact, white can force checkmate in just 5 moves. And the solution is check, leaving black with only one option, counter check. And now white makes a quiet move, moving out of check, leaving black the time to advance the h pawn to h2, about to promote. And now the brilliant idea, moving the rook to g3, allowing either black pawn to promote. However, very importantly, neither one with a check or neither one stopping white's idea. And now, regardless which pawn black promotes, the beautiful combination comes by playing rook a3 check, leaving black with only one legal move, and then a pawn checkmate. Also, a good example, never give up hope. Always look for opportunities, be creative. And that's why it's so important to solve combinations, to solve endgame studies, to widen your library of ideas, your library of patterns such as this. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned some, and you will watch that f2 or f7 square better than you did so far, as well as you look out for opportunities if your opponent doesn't pay enough attention to it. Thank you for listening, and I'll have more chess wisdom for you next week. Take care. Until then, bye-bye.